You're back tonight here on In Focus. Eskom may well be on the way to overcoming the power supply constraints that have seen South Africa suffer endless bouts of load shedding. This comes after a utility identified 18 winning bids for the green energy projects that will have direct access to the national grid. But that may still be some long way from happening. Joining us now to give us a likely timeline of what the green projects look like and when will they kick in is Hugo Pienaar, a Chief Economist at the Bureau for Economic Research. Hugo, good evening and thank you very much for your time. 3 years from now is when we are likely to be seeing some kind of reprieve from the current bout of load shedding. Is that a realistic timeline and why?
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, look, it's a bit difficult to pin it down precisely, but what we do know is there are several green energy projects in the pipeline. So you've now referred to the projects that Eskom announced last week, but of course there are multiple strands going here. There are those projects, there are the government-run independent power producer programs. I say government run because the government puts together the different bid windows for these projects. And then there's a third strand, I think, and that is private sector companies who on their own are now starting to invest in green energy. But all of these things take time. So these projects, so even if we start with all of them today, which we are not going to, but let's say everything that's in the pipeline starts today, it takes about 18 months roughly after all of the approvals, environmental approvals, etc., have been received. It takes about 18 months roughly. Obviously, it depends from project to project, but let's say 18 months from the start of construction to completion. So only after 18 months can the power then flow onto the grid. Now, given that some of these projects have not reached financial closure, in other words, all of the approvals have not been received yet, it's still a bit up in the air when construction will start. Now, again, the different projects will start at different times, but given these sort of delays and then the time it actually takes for construction, I think we're only looking at around 2 years plus before you really start to see more megawatts, or I want to say proper megawatts coming on stream.
Yeah. Speaking of power, sorry to come in there, flowing onto the grid, there are some who are skeptical that power will flow onto the grid from those IPPs, or even if it is flowing onto the grid right now. And others are saying, for example, what we need to be looking at also along these IPPs is storage. So buying tons and tons of batteries that will be able to store this energy, because they believe it's not something that you can immediately and directly inject into the Eskom power grid. What's your knowledge of that?
So, I mean, the one thing, so it's not just the storage, of course, it is Eskom needs to invest quite a bit of money on the distribution line. So to be able to carry this energy. So there are, again, a number of things that need to be put in place. So I guess there are two things here. The one is the mere construction activity will clearly give us a boost to GDP growth. It lifts private sector investment. So that's the benefit you get in the interim from these projects. But of course, ultimately, the idea is that it takes away the burden of Eskom. It sort of relieves this 4,000 to 6,000 megawatt gap in electricity generation that we currently sit with.
Yeah, 18 winning bids from an auction in April to offer independent power producers access to vacant land in Mpumalanga. How many megawatts are we really going to get from those projects? I mean, you've already mentioned we need possibly 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of power.
Yeah, so Eskom is talking about that together it's 1,800 megawatts that these projects will add. So I mean that's pretty substantial. So 2,000 megawatts would be two stages of load shedding, right? So I mean that on its own is quite a bit. But then, as mentioned, that is just one strand. Then we have the bid window 5 IPP projects. That is, I think, about 2,500 megawatts. So then already you're up to 4,500. So there is, again, there's a lot of projects in the pipeline. It's just that we need to get the final closure so that construction can start, and then again, in 18 months' time, power can actually start to flow onto the grid.
Yeah. Is that enough to power our current consumption needs and future growth?
Well, again, I mean, given what Eskom is telling us, what the gap is, I mean, this will go quite some ways. But you are, of course, correct that if these projects only 2.5, 3 years down the line, we actually start to see power flowing, depending on what has happened to Eskom's maintenance over that period, and whether they can sort of get a grip on all of these unplanned outages we are seeing currently. So if you throw all of that together, so if we can have less unplanned outages from Eskom in 2-3 years' time, and at the same time you have all of these megawatts on the alternative energy coming on stream, we do think we can be in a substantially better position than we are currently in terms of load shedding or the reliability of electricity supply.
Hugo, this is a medium-term projection. It's something that will happen in the medium term and maybe even in the long term. Is there something we can do immediately to be able to assist us with the load shedding?
Yeah, that's it. So what we can do in the immediate future from a consumer point of view is obviously to use electricity as sparingly as possible. And of course, this has happened over time. Eskom needs to do the maintenance on the older plants, but this is a challenge during times when you have all of these unplanned outages. So then they can't do the maintenance that should be done, because of course if they do that, we have even more load shedding. So in the foreseeable future, and this is not something new, Eskom has been warning about this, it is going to be, we sit with an unreliable and an unpredictable, and I'm now quoting Eskom, electricity supply, and that unfortunately is not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah. So in Eskom terms, the unplanned generation losses are going to be here to stay. It's not something that they can fix. It's not something that they can say, oh, okay, let's refurbish, let's replenish our power plants at this current moment so that we reduce these unplanned generation losses.
Look, this system is old. I mean, and I'm no expert on the nitty-gritty of Eskom's system, but it's in the public domain. These power stations are very old. They have not been maintained correctly for many years. The current management of Eskom are now doing that, but they sit with significant backlogs of maintenance. So yeah, unfortunately, there are no quick fixes at this stage.
Is there capacity at Eskom to make tough and maybe sometimes unpopular decisions, particularly with Eskom now being faced with this wage dispute?
Well, I think one needs to give the current management a lot of credit. I mean, again, they came in with a sort of a dire situation, and they are, I think, focusing on the things that should have been focused on many years ago already. So they've now had to sort of pick up the slack here. And up till now, they do seem to be holding the ground on the wage demands. So they are offering a wage increase in line with historic inflation. And up till now, they've not budged on that. So we need to see how it pans on. But I cannot see them sort of meeting the union or some of the union demands of double-digit increases. I mean, that given Eskom's debt situation or financial situation, they simply can't afford to give those sort of wage increases.
So in a sense, then they will have to rely on this social compact with labor, and labor coming on board and understanding the situation. And without that, we are likely to see a prolonged situation of this industrial action.
Possibly, although some of the statements coming out of Eskom today suggest that most of their workers were back today. There were some issues here and there, but it doesn't seem that it's by far not the majority of Eskom workers that are causing the difficulties at this stage.
Hugo, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. That's Chief Economist at the Bureau for Economic Research, Hugo Pienaar, there giving us a timeline of what we can expect as far as the work that is being done at Eskom and some of those projects to be completed and come online and give us the power that we need.